I still remember the Tuesday morning I opened my quarterly retirement statement. It was 9:15. I was sitting at my desk in the marketing department. I was 28 years old and finally feeling like an actual adult who had his act together. I was earning $75,000 a year. I had spent my early 20s completely broke and constantly scraping by. Now I finally had a little bit of breathing room. I was doing everything the financial experts on television told me to do. Get the employer match. Invest consistently out of every paycheck. Ignore the noise. Let the market do the heavy lifting over time. So that is exactly what I did. I was drinking my second cup of terrible office coffee. I was staring at a screen that said my account balance had just crossed $30,000. I felt proud. I felt safe. I felt like I was winning the game. Then I scrolled down to page 3. There was a tiny line item near the bottom of the screen. It was printed in a gray font that almost blended perfectly into the white background. It said administrative deduction. The amount next to it was $75. $75 out of a $30,000 balance. It looked like absolutely nothing. It looked like a rounding error. I figured it was just the cost of doing business. I almost closed the window and went back to answering my emails. What I did not know at the time was that this single, harmless-looking deduction was the trapdoor to a financial system designed to quietly drain away 25% of my total lifetime wealth. My name is Mark, and I spend way too much time obsessing over the hidden math inside the retirement accounts we are all told will save us. If you are someone who diligently puts money away every paycheck but feels like the balance never grows quite as fast as the experts promise it will, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today, I am not talking about how to pick the right stock. I want to talk about a perfectly legal wealth extraction system operating quietly inside your portfolio right now. And I know it because I have been exactly where you are standing right now. Before that Tuesday morning, I thought I understood how investing worked. I thought the financial industry was a service provider. You pay them a tiny fee, they manage the complicated stuff behind the scenes, and you both get rich over a few decades. It sounds like a completely fair trade. A 1% fee sounds perfectly reasonable when you say it out loud. 1% is literally a single penny on the dollar. If someone offered to manage your entire financial future for just 1 penny out of every dollar, you would probably shake their hand and thank them. I know I did. I thought the 1% was simply a tax on my gains. I thought they only got paid if I got paid. But when I finally sat down with a blank spreadsheet and ran the numbers for myself, my stomach dropped. I realized that the 1% was not coming out of my profits. It was coming out of my total balance. Every single year. Whether the market went up, down, or entirely sideways. And worse, I realized that the money they took this year would not be there to grow for me next year, or the year after that, or the decade after that. I was not just paying a small fee, I was bleeding out my compound interest. But that $75 administrative deduction was only the surface. When I started looking for where the rest of the money was going, I discovered a mechanism so well hidden that most people go their entire lives without ever knowing it is there. I spent the rest of that Tuesday thinking about the $75. It was not enough money to ruin my life, but it was enough money to bother me. I did not know it had a name until I started really digging into this. I'd been calling it the invisible tax in my head. Turns out it already had a name. It is called the fee trap. I did not learn this from my human resources department. I learned it a few weeks later. One night, I was deep down an internet rabbit hole trying to understand how my retirement account actually worked. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning. My laptop screen was the only light in the room. I came across a transcript of a speech from 2005. It was given by a man named John Bogle. He was the founder of Vanguard and a legend in the investing world. In that speech, he talked about what he called the tyranny of compounding costs. He was speaking to a room full of financial professionals. He was telling them exactly how their industry made money off people like me. He said that in the financial markets, you do not get what you pay for. You get exactly what you do not pay for. That concept completely broke my brain. I had spent my whole life believing that paying a higher price meant getting a better product. John Bogle was saying the exact opposite was true when it came to investing. That was when I started looking closely at the first layer of the fee trap. This is the layer you can actually see, if you know where to look. I used to think that the fees on employer retirement accounts were strictly regulated to be almost zero. I assumed the government protected us from getting overcharged on our own life savings. Then I found a 2021 study by the Center for American Progress showing that the average American worker pays roughly $138,000 in hidden investment fees over their lifetime. I stared at that number for a long time. $138,000 is not a rounding error. That is a house down payment. That is 5 or 6 extra years of working just to pay the people managing your money. I realized my $75 deduction was part of that massive number. I called my human resources department the next day. I asked them what the $75 fee was actually for. The representative was very polite. They told me it was the record-keeping fee. They said it covered the cost of compliance, the website portal, and customer service. I asked them if I could opt out of the fee and just manage the account myself. The person on the phone chuckled slightly. They told me it was a mandatory administrative cost if I wanted to participate in the company plan. I was locked in. I was paying a cover charge just to access my own money. But at that point, I still thought I had solved the mystery. I thought I had found the leak. I figured a few $100s a year in administrative costs was annoying but manageable. But that website fee was just the cover charge. The real robbery was happening entirely out of sight, buried in a document I had never bothered to read. At first, I only saw this part, and I thought I understood it. The administrative fee, the record-keeping deduction, whatever they wanted to call it, it was a flat tax just for participating in the system. Let me walk you through the exact math I did that night at my kitchen table. I was paying $75 every 3 months. That is $300 a year. When I looked at my monthly budget, $300 over a whole year felt completely harmless. It was the cost of a few streaming subscriptions. It was a couple of weeknight takeout orders. It did not seem like a life-altering amount of money, but I was not thinking in decades. I was thinking in paychecks, and that is exactly how they want you to think. So I opened up my spreadsheet. I wanted to see the lifetime cost. I typed in $300. I multiplied it by the 40 years I expected to be working before I could retire. The total was $12,000. Paying $12,000 just to keep my account open felt like a complete rip-off. But I was missing the most important rule of finance. Every dollar you pay in fees is a dollar that cannot compound for your future. So I ran a different calculation. I calculated what would happen if I was able to keep that $300 every single year. I projected investing it into the market with an average historical return of 8%. I hit enter on the keyboard. The final number was not $12,000. The final number was slightly over $77,000. I stared at the screen for a long time. By charging me a flat $300 a year, the company managing my plan was essentially confiscating $77,000 from my future self. That was layer 1 of the fee trap, the visible toll booth. I used to think that companies covered the cost of providing a retirement plan as a benefit to their workers. Then I found a government report showing that in the vast majority of employer-sponsored plans, the employees shoulder almost the entire burden of the administrative costs. The company gets the tax break for offering the plan. We pay the maintenance bill. We are a captive audience. I had no choice in which provider my company used. The Human Resources Department chose them. And captive customers always pay premium prices. I called my friend Dave the next day. Dave was earning about $60,000 a year working in corporate sales. I told him to log in and check his own statements. Dave called me back an hour later sounding completely defeated. His company plan charged a flat fee, plus a tiny percentage of his balance just for basic administration. He was paying roughly $400 a year. We ran his numbers together on the phone. Over a 40-year career, Dave was giving up over $100,000 in future wealth just to have an active account. We both agreed the system felt rigged, but we also agreed there was nothing we could really do about it. If you want the free money from the employer match, you have to use the employer plan. You have to pay the toll. So I accepted it. I figured losing $77,000 over my lifetime was just the price of admission to the middle class. But when I dug deeper, I found something that most people never notice. I realized that the visible administrative fee was just a distraction. It was the shiny object they put on your statement so you feel like you know what you are paying. But it was not the real cost. The real financial bleeding was happening underneath the surface. And it was completely legal. But when I dug deeper, I found something that most people never notice. I realized that the $75 administrative fee I saw on my statement was practically a decoy. It was annoying. It was unfair. But it was just a flat rate. It did not grow. The real trap was hiding inside the actual investments I had chosen. I went back to my retirement portal. I wanted to see exactly where my money was parked. On my first day of work, I had clicked a quick button to enroll in the company plan. I picked the default investment option because it sounded safe and easy. It was a target date fund built for people planning to retire in the year 2060. I clicked on a tiny link next to the name of the fund. It downloaded a document called a prospectus. It was a massive legal file full of dense financial jargon. I had never read one before. Most people go their entire lives without ever reading one. I used the search function on my computer and typed in the word fee. That is when I found a completely different term. It was called an expense ratio. I used to think that the people managing these massive mutual funds made their money by taking a small cut of the profits they generated. I figured if they made me money, they deserved a little piece of the upside. It felt like a fair partnership. Then I found a 2022 report from the financial research firm Morningstar. It showed that many actively managed funds and default retirement options charge expense ratios of roughly 1% or more. I read the definition of an expense ratio 3 times just to make sure I was not misunderstanding it. They do not take a cut of your profits. They take a percentage of your entire account balance. My target date fund had an expense ratio of exactly 1%. Let me walk you through what that actually meant for my life. I had $30,000 in my account. 1% of $30,000 is $300. So, on top of the flat administrative fee I was already paying, the fund managers were quietly skimming another $300 away from me this year. But here is the terrifying part about an expense ratio. It is a percentage. That means it grows exactly as fast as your wealth grows. If I kept saving and the market did well, my balance next year might hit $40,000. At 1%, their invisible fee would jump to $400. In 10 years, if my account grew to $150,000, they would take $1,500. In 20 years, if I managed to save $500,000, they would reach into my account and extract $5,000 every single year. They do not send you a bill for this. You never have to write them a check. You never see the money leave your bank account. They just shave it off the top of your investment returns before the numbers ever hit your screen. If the market goes up 10%, they take their 1% and give you 9%. If the market goes down 10%, they still take their 1%, pushing you further into the red. They are a silent partner in your life savings. They carry absolutely zero risk, but they guarantee themselves a massive cut of your total wealth every single year until you die. I sat at my kitchen table feeling completely trapped. I was doing everything right. I was sacrificing my current lifestyle to build a secure future, and a massive financial institution was legally siphoning away my money in broad daylight. But I had only calculated the direct cost. I was only looking at the actual dollars they were taking out of my account. And this is the part that took me years to figure out, the part nobody tells you. And this is the part that took me years to figure out, the part nobody tells you. I was sitting there looking at the 1% expense ratio. I was annoyed that they were going to take $300 this year. I was frustrated they would take $5,000 a year if my balance ever hit $500,000. But I was still looking at the math like a normal person. I was only counting the actual dollars leaving my account. I was ignoring the most powerful force in the financial universe. Compound interest. When you pay a 1% fee, you are not just losing that 1% today. You are losing every single dollar that 1% would have earned for you over the rest of your life. It is a permanent amputation of your compounding power. Let me walk you through the real math. The math that made me want to throw my laptop across the kitchen. I projected my own future. I was 28 years old. I planned to retire at 68. That is 40 years of investing. I assumed I would start with my current $30,000 balance. I assumed I would contribute $500 a month for the next 40 years. I assumed the market would return a completely average 8% a year. If I paid exactly 0 fees, that account would grow to $1.9 million by the time I retired. That is the dream. That is the promise of the American middle class. Then I added the 1% expense ratio back into the spreadsheet. I hit enter. The number crashed down to $1.4 million. $500,000 just vanished. $500,000. Gone. I used to think a 1% fee meant I kept 99% of my money. Then I found a report from the Securities and Exchange Commission illustrating that a 1% annual fee will reduce a retirement portfolio by almost 28% over a 40-year timeline. I read that sentence until my eyes hurt. They were not taking 1% of my final wealth. They were taking over a quarter of everything I would ever build. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I looked at the year-by-year breakdown on my screen. The trap was so brilliant because it started out so small. In year 1, the fee was just over $300. In year 10, the fee was about $1,200. Still annoying, but not terrifying. But because the fee grew as my balance grew, and because I was losing the compounding power of all those stolen fees, the math went completely nuclear in the later decades. By year 30, they would be taking out over $6,000 a year in fees. That was exactly what I was contributing. They would be extracting as much money as I was putting in. And in year 40, the final year before I retired, their 1% cut would be over $14,000 for that single year alone. Over the entire 40 years, I would pay them roughly $200,000 in direct fees. But because that $200,000 was not in my account growing at 8%, I would lose another $300,000 in missed compound interest. That is how you lose $500,000 to a 1% fee. You take all the risk. You put up all the capital. You do all the saving. You panic during the market crashes. And they sit in an office building quietly shaving off 25% of your total lifetime wealth. It was not a service. It was a harvest. I realized that the entire mutual fund industry was not built to help me reach financial freedom. It was built to siphon my wealth into their pockets exactly when my compounding finally started to get powerful. I was working 40 hours a week. I was packing my lunch to save money. I was driving an old car. I was doing all of that just to hand $500,000 to a fund manager I had never even met. And the absolute worst part was knowing I still had to map out the exact alternative. I opened a blank spreadsheet. I needed to see the two paths side by side. I created 2 columns on my screen. Column A was the path I was currently on, the target date fund with the 1% fee. Column B was the mathematical alternative. I had read about something called a broad market index fund. It did the exact same job, but the fee was 0.04%. I wanted to see exactly what 0.96% of a difference looked like over my working life. I used my starting balance of $30,000. I kept the contribution at $500 a month. I kept the average market return at 8% for both columns. I scrolled down to year 10. In column A, the 1% fee path, my balance was $132,000. In column B, the low fee path, my balance was $139,000. A $7,000 difference. It stung, but I could survive it. It was the price of a decent used car. I scrolled down to year 20. In column A, my balance was $350,000. In column B, my balance was $395,000. Now, the gap was $45,000. That was more than half of my current annual salary. That was an entire year of my life handed over to a fund manager. My chest started to feel tight. I scrolled down to year 30. In column A, my balance was $818,000. In column B, my balance was $992,000. The gap had exploded to $174,000. That was a house in some parts of the country. That was a college education for 2 kids. Then I scrolled all the way to the bottom. Year 40. The day I finally get to retire. In column A, the path the financial industry put me on by default, my final balance was $1.4 million. In column B, the path I could take if I just moved my money to the low-fee index fund, my final balance was $1.9 million. The final gap was exactly $500,000. $500,000. I pushed my chair back from the kitchen table. I felt physically sick. I used to think that fee differences only mattered to multimillionaires with complicated portfolios. Then, I found a report from the Pew Charitable Trusts analyzing retirement accounts. It showed that a standard worker earning a median wage will lose an estimated $155,000 to fees if they are placed in high-cost funds instead of low-cost alternatives. Because I started early and saved aggressively, my penalty was 3 times worse. $500,000 is not just money, it is time. I divided $500,000 by my $75,000 salary. That was almost 7 years of my gross income. I was going to spend 7 entire years of my working life just to pay the fee on my own savings. I thought about all the overtime I had worked. I thought about the vacations I skipped in my 20s because I was trying to be responsible. I thought about the cheap apartments I lived in. I did all of that to save money. And this entire time, a massive financial institution was sitting quietly in the background, waiting to harvest my lifetime effort. And they were doing it completely legally. They were doing it right in front of my face. I looked at the $1.4 million in column A. It still looked like a lot of money. If you have never done the math, you would reach retirement, look at that $1.4 million, and think you won. You would never even know that the $1.9 million existed. You would never know. You paid $500,000 for a product you could have bought for almost nothing. That is the true genius of the fee trap. It steals your money invisibly, and it leaves you feeling grateful for what is left. But as I sat there staring at the screen, a new question started bothering me. If the math is this obvious, why do we all keep falling for it? I sat at my kitchen table staring at the $500,000 gap on my screen. I felt completely stupid. I work in marketing. My entire job is understanding how people make decisions. I study consumer behavior for a living. How did I let an industry siphon away $500,000 without me ever noticing? That was when I finally understood why I kept getting stuck, even when I knew the right answer. The financial industry uses a very specific psychological trick to bypass human risk assessment. They use percentages instead of hard dollar amounts. Human brains are not wired to process compounding percentages over long periods of time. We are wired to understand concrete numbers. If someone asks you to hand over $500,000 for a service, your brain immediately screams no. Your survival instincts kick in. You demand to see exactly what you are getting for that mountain of cash. But if someone asks you for 1%, your brain relaxes. 1 is the smallest whole number we have. It feels safe. It feels like a bargain. I used to think that most people were just like me, eventually figuring out the fees if they look close enough. Then I found a 2018 study by the American Association of Retired Persons showing that 71% of adults with a retirement account do not even know they pay any investment fees at all. I read that statistic and realized the system was working exactly as designed. Almost 3/4 of the country is bleeding out their future wealth, and they do not even know the wound exists. The industry intentionally hides the real cost behind layers of friction and clever design. I thought back to my orientation day at work. The human resources representative handed me a glossy brochure. It had pictures of happy people walking on a beach. It had big, colorful pie charts showing my asset allocation. It made me feel like I was taking control of my life. But the actual cost of the fund was buried in a 50-page digital document that I had to actively search for. And even when I found it, the number was expressed as an expense ratio instead of a dollar amount. They do this because they never want you to feel the pain of the purchase. If my car mechanic charges me $300, he hands me an invoice. I have to physically hand him my credit card. I feel the money leaving my life. Wall Street never makes you feel the pain. They do not send you a bill. They just quietly shave the money off your balance before you even log in. You only ever see the final, slightly lower number. And because the stock market generally goes up over time, your account balance still looks like it is growing. You feel like a winner while they are actively emptying your pockets. Imagine if other industries worked this way. Imagine hiring a plumber to fix your kitchen sink. He finishes the job and tells you his fee is 1% of your total home value every single year for the rest of your life. You would laugh in his face and throw him out of your house. But when a guy in a custom suit on Wall Street offers the exact same deal for your life savings, we just sign the paperwork and thank him for his time. I got played because I confused a small percentage with a small amount of money. They are not the same thing. Over a lifetime, a small percentage of your total wealth is a massive fortune. But even as I sat there angry at the system, a tiny voice in the back of my head started arguing with me. Let me say out loud the objection that is forming in your head right now, because it used to form in mine. Let me say out loud the objection that is forming in your head right now, because it used to form in mine. I sat there arguing with my own spreadsheet. I told myself that you get what you pay for. That is the fundamental rule of capitalism. If I am paying a 1% fee to a massive mutual fund, I am paying for an elite team of financial experts. I pictured guys in tailored suits staring at 6 computer monitors. They have supercomputers. They have access to corporate executives and private research. They work on Wall Street. Their entire professional life is dedicated to beating the market. So, obviously, I thought, if I pay them their fee, they will make me so much extra money that the fee will completely pay for itself. The 1% is just the price of excellence. They will protect my money when the market crashes. They will buy the perfect stocks when the market goes up. I am paying for their genius. I used to think that paying a premium for a professional fund manager guaranteed me market-beating returns over a long timeline. Then I found a 2023 report from S&P Global tracking the performance of actively managed mutual funds. It showed that roughly 93% of active fund managers failed to beat a simple, unmanaged benchmark index fund over a 20-year period. I read that number out loud to my empty kitchen. 93%. If you hired a contractor who built a house that collapsed 93% of the time, you would not pay him a premium fee. You would have his license revoked. But on Wall Street, failure is a highly profitable business model. This is the counterintuitive truth that completely shattered my financial worldview. In almost every other area of human life, paying more money gets you a better result. If you buy a more expensive car, it generally drives better. If you hire a more expensive lawyer, you usually get better legal defense. But in the world of investing, the exact opposite is true. The more you pay in fees, the less money you end up with. The managers are not magic. They are just incredibly expensive. When a fund manager charges you a 1% fee, they do not just have to match the market average. They have to beat the market by more than 1% every single year just for you to break even against a low-cost alternative. And the data proves that almost none of them can do it consistently over decades. They are playing a rigged game. They get paid their percentage, whether the fund goes up or down. They get rich on your fees, while you take all the actual market risk. I realized I was paying a massive premium for the illusion of control. I was paying $500,000 over my lifetime for a comforting story that someone smarter than me was guarding my future. I stopped arguing with the spreadsheet. I finally accepted the math. The high fees were not a guarantee of high returns. They were a guarantee of high costs. Once I accepted that the expensive experts were actually bleeding my wealth dry, the anger faded. It was replaced by a very cold, very clear realization. No one was going to save me. I had to fix this myself. Once I realized I was actively bleeding out $500,000, I knew I had to stop the bleeding immediately. I could not sleep that night until I fixed it. The first thing I did was log back into my company retirement portal to audit every single dollar I had invested. I wanted to see the exact expense ratio of my target date fund in plain text. I used to think finding fee information would be simple and transparent. Then I found a 2020 report from the Pew Charitable Trusts showing that nearly 40% of plan participants cannot find the fee information in their own retirement portals, even when they actively look for it. I was absolutely part of that 40% for the first hour. I clicked through 5 different confusing menus. I opened 3 different legal documents. Finally, I found a page labeled Fund Fact Sheets, and right there, buried in a tiny gray box on the second page, was the 1% expense ratio I had been paying since my first day on the job. Seeing it in black and white made the theft feel entirely real. The second step I took was searching that exact same portal for the cheapest alternative my company allowed. I ignored the names of the funds. I ignored the marketing descriptions about growth and stability. I only looked at the column showing the expense ratios. I scrolled past funds charging 0.8%. I scrolled past funds charging 1.2%. At the very bottom of the list, I found a basic S&P 500 index fund. It did not have a fancy name. It just tracked the largest companies in the American economy. I looked at the expense ratio. It was 0.04%. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app. I wanted to see exactly what that meant for my current $30,000 balance. If I stayed in my current fund, my fee for this year was exactly $300. If I moved my money to the basic index fund, my fee for the entire year would drop to exactly $12. $12 instead of $300. I was paying a $288 premium every single year for absolutely no reason, but I knew the real power was not just saving $288 today. I remembered the compounding math I had done earlier at my kitchen table. If I took that saved $288 every year and let it compound in the market at an 8% return for the next 40 years, that single change would add over $75,000 to my final retirement balance. Just by switching one fund, just by changing one setting on a website. I had found the escape hatch. I saw the exact path out of the fee trap. I knew exactly which fund I needed to choose to save my $500,000 over my lifetime. But finding the exit door is not the same thing as walking through it. I still had to actually move my entire life savings, change my future contributions, and hope I was not making a massive mistake. I took a deep breath. I clicked the button labeled Exchange Investments. The third step I took was moving every single dollar out of the expensive target date fund and into the 0.04% index fund. It took exactly 3 clicks of my mouse. I transferred my entire $30,000 balance. Then, I went to my contribution settings. I made sure every future $500 paycheck deposit would go straight into the low-cost index fund instead of the default option. I sat back in my chair. The deed was done. I still could not escape the $75 quarterly administrative fee. That was the toll booth I had to pay just to get my free employer match. I accepted that I would lose some money there. But by fixing the hidden expense ratio, I had stopped the massive, compounding financial bleeding underneath the surface. I closed the laptop. It was almost 4 in the morning. But I felt completely awake. Let me tell you exactly what those 3 clicks produced for my future. By dropping my investment fee from 1% down to 0.04%, I essentially bought back my own compound interest. I reclaimed the $500,000 the financial industry was quietly planning to harvest from my accounts over the next 4 decades. I did not have to work any overtime to earn that $500,000. I did not have to negotiate a difficult raise with my boss. I did not have to skip a single vacation or cut back on my grocery budget. I just had to stop paying a luxury premium for a financial product that was actively harming my future. I changed my life trajectory from $1.4 million back to the $1.9 million I actually deserved. I used to think that building wealth required complex strategies, stock picking, and insider knowledge. But the emotional truth I finally accepted that night is much simpler and a lot colder. Nobody is coming to save you. The financial industry is a business. Their job is to extract wealth from your pockets and put it into theirs. They use tiny percentages because they know human beings are terrible at calculating compound math over decades. They make the official documents intentionally confusing because they know you are tired after a 40-hour work week. They rely on your exhaustion. They count on your blind trust. You have to take control of your own rescue. You have to be willing to look at the uncomfortable numbers. You have to read the boring legal documents. You have to open a blank spreadsheet and run the math for your own life. Because if you do not do the math on your own money, I promise you, someone on Wall Street is already doing it for you. And they are keeping the difference. If this video helped you see your finances differently, I want you to hit that like button and subscribe. Every video I make is something I wish someone had told me years earlier. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.